Tax havens. Should the rich be allowed to hide their wealth from the taxman while the middle class pays? How much tax revenue does Canada lose to secret accounts in Switzerland and exotic islands? And do most Canadians even care about the rich and what they do with their money? We'll try to answer these questions and more. I'm Patricia Plant, and this is Tax TV. In April 2013, Canada's national television network, the CBC, released details of an international data dump that has shaken the world of offshore banking and tax havens to its very core. The data dump exposed over 30 years of offshore account records and personal data for more than 100,000 people around the world. 450 of them were identified as Canadians. Tax lawyer and tax author Paul DioGuardi is here to help us understand the dangers this database leak poses to those Canadians. Paul, we're looking at what might be the biggest expose of offshore account holders in the history of modern tax. How is this info leak dangerous to the Canadians whose offshore accounts have been outed?
It's a real bombshell. You have to understand that the scope of the personal information and account details is intimately specific. The hard drive secretly sent to the Australian journalist, who ultimately shared its contents with the world press, held over 30 years worth of information. It's estimated to be 160 times bigger than the volume of information in the WikiLeaks scandals. Over 100,000 account holders were identified with very personal financial details. So the information potentially implicates anyone with any connections to banking offshore.
How many of those people are Canadians?
The CBC reported that about 450 Canadians were on the list and about 4,000 Americans. Then there were Russian politicians, heads of state in Middle Eastern countries, as well as the daughter of Fernand Marcos, and the list goes on and on.
Let's look at those 450 now infamous Canadians. What can they expect now that the world can look into their offshore activities?
Well, now that the Canada Revenue Agency has been given access to that list, those 450 Canadians are exposed to scrutiny, audits, net worth analysis, which is something the CRA does without you knowing about it, and then reassessments. Any or all of it can be dangerous, very, very dangerous.
Wherein lies the greatest danger?
It's no secret that governments around the world are desperate for revenue. One of the biggest sources of new money, or more money, would be to tighten up the tax loopholes and catch the people who are robbing the public treasuries of the world of hundreds of billions of dollars of tax revenue. All of us would pay less tax, and our governments could balance their budgets if even a fraction of this lost money could be recouped.
Is our government smart enough to do anything about it?
In my opinion, they're not, but the Canadian government has been under fire from business people and taxpayer advocacy groups for its poor record in seeking out offshore tax cheats. This data leak gives the government the opportunity to at least look tough. And if you're going to go after the tax evaders, the easiest targets are the birds in hand.
We remember the Swiss bank account scandal with that bank in Liechtenstein in 2010. Did the CRA use that list of account holders to find any tax cheats?
A Canadian television network news investigation suggested that there had been no more than 75 audits and 25 reassessments as a result of that leak. Just a drop in the bucket, really. And Canada has apparently signed an agreement with Liechtenstein that protects anyone who currently has an account there from the CRA scrutiny.
Do you have any suggestions to help those 450 Canadians?
If you're on the list and you're not reporting the account or the money hidden offshore, you definitely need to protect yourself.
How does one do that?
Without reviewing the facts in detail, it's not wise to just shoot from the hip and rely on the Voluntary Disclosures Program, so popular with accountants and less specialized tax helpers. Remember, by proceeding with a voluntary disclosure, you are voluntarily waiving your charter right against self-incrimination in a situation where potential criminal charges are present. The Canada Revenue Agency's Voluntary Disclosure Program in and of itself is not an adequate protection against the potential of a witch hunt like this. If accepted, a voluntary disclosure offers you protection against prosecution for tax evasion. However, before a disclosure is accepted, the CRA can and often does audit everything in your financial records. If you hold back anything, the disclosure can be disqualified, at which point the CRA is already in possession of enough information to launch a criminal investigation and then prosecute you. Moreover, the CRA could decide that the disclosure is not voluntary because they were already aware of your tax evasion simply by virtue of the presence of your name on this database. You need a lawyer, not an accountant or a tax preparer, representing your interest. If anything goes wrong, these accounting types can be forced to testify against you. A tax lawyer who is your retained counsel cannot be forced in this situation.
What protection do you recommend people with offshore accounts seek?
As a tax lawyer, I would advise any Canadian who believes their name and account details are in the leaked database should, as a cautionary measure, consult with legal counsel to secure the protection of solicitor-client privilege. This protection can help shield you from investigation, or at the very least, limit the scope of any investigation. In a situation as volatile and as highly publicized as this, both the honest taxpayer and the Canadian who's been hiding something offshore can be victimized, especially now that the Canadian government has agreed to reward whistleblowers for information about offshore tax evaders.
This was big news in the spring budget of 2013. The finance minister announced rewards for information leading to the recovery of offshore tax revenues. Do you think he knew about this data leak?
Yes, I think he did. The CBC apparently has been working on the information for about 7 months before they announced the leak. So most likely he did.
Then why start a reward system now?
Most first world countries pay for information. Canada decided it was time to do the same. But there's always a danger when you pay someone to snitch. Greed can tempt anyone to turn against you, your employees, your financial advisors, or in some cases even your own family. As a tax lawyer, I would suggest that if you're going to be a whistleblower, you should first seek the protection of legal counsel. The Minister of Finance may be happy to pay a reward for good, clean information that leads to the recovery of tax revenues, but in verifying the caliber of the lead, the investigation might also delve into the whistleblower's own financial affairs. That could mean an audit. This is not something you should enter into lightly or unprotected.
More than a year has passed and the media story seems all but dead. Are you aware of any related special investigations yet?
No, I'm not. Presently, I'm working for clients who have been approached, but of course I cannot comment on their cases.
Any guess as to why no real investigations?
Canada's tax laws place a heavy burden on the shoulders of the middle class, especially the salaried middle class. Unfortunately, our tax laws are used against us by offshore investors who find ways to come here and enjoy the benefits of living here without paying any tax at all.
Do you think it's fair to the taxpayers of Canada that non-Canadians can use our country as a tax haven?
Money is a competitive business. Canada needs to keep up with other financial nations of the world, so our system can't be perfect.
Thank you, Paul, for joining us. I'm Patricia Plant, and this is Tax TV. Interview with the Tax Lawyer is an excerpt from Paul DioGuardi's new book, Never Smile at a Crocodile. You can buy the book online at Amazon.ca or download the ebook version. See more at neversmileatacrocodile.com.